Indiana University School of Medicine. We have a pretty renowned bone program there, and which is why I wanted to go to school there. I actually grew up in Indianapolis as well, so I've been a long time Indy, like native. But yeah, I studied multiple different bone and blood disorders. It's funny being in a group like this now because you guys are very technical, and now I have to say like bone and blood disorders. I can't say multiple myeloma and musculoskeletal comorbidities. So happy to be with fellow scientists. And anyway, during my whole PhD process, I had worked on, again, essentially drugs for different bone and blood disorders, multiple myeloma, and the drugs I worked on there were actually being licensed out to a startup organization anyway, and so I had a little bit of a viewpoint of the startup world. And then my PhD, I did specifically drug targeting for osteoporosis. As you all probably know, there are currently only 3 bone building drugs on the market for osteoporosis, and they all stop working after 2 years. And so I studied why that was happening, and the cell types responsible for that. And I did my PhD with Joseph Bidwell. I don't know if you know him or not, but he was my PhD advisor. And so we discovered this gene, discovered the cell types responsible for like inhibiting bone formation, and we were developing a drug for it, a drug target for it. And I was nearing the end of my PhD, and kind of, you work, as you all know, like you work your whole 5-6 years, and you finally like discover something cool. And then what are the next steps after that? I felt like, we should really take this forward and develop a further drug for it. However, my PI at the time was at the end of his career. You don't know if you want to risk your entire like reputation on developing a company or developing a drug that might not work. There's still a very high risk of failure rate. And so we were constantly battling with what is the true next step of our discovery. And again, this is of course 6 months before my defense. And so I'm having like a quarter life crisis of what I'm going to do with my life at the time. I was really passionate about innovation, but I did not want to be a traditional academic. I felt like I was giving 100% of my energy into academia, but it wasn't giving me a lot of energy back. I was pretty burnt out at the time. However, still super passionate about innovation and working with science and scientists and using like my degree for good in a way. And so I started my background since I did drug discovery. I knew a lot about patenting. I knew a lot about the regulatory process, and I had a strong background in scientific communication. I did a lot of public speaking as well. And so I kind of wanted to use all of those skills, but also develop a new skill set. And this is me being candid, but I felt like at the end of my PhD, I almost knew too much about one little topic, and that actually kind of scared me. I felt like I wasn't able to learn new things because I knew too much about this one area, and that's just my own perspective of myself. And so I wanted to learn something new and a new skill set, but adjacent to science. And one of my colleagues at the time had done a fellowship with a venture capital firm called Flagship Pioneering, which is in Boston, Massachusetts, where they help form startup companies. But you're surrounded by scientific experts and business development people. And he was like, you would really be good at this. You have the technical background, you have the communication skills, the public speaking skills. And I can really talk to anyone. I always loved being out of the lab and just chatting with anybody in the hallway, to avoid doing my histomorphometry slides that take hours to do. And so Indiana University Ventures, was looking for a life science expert at the time that could be taught the business. And so I went ahead and applied. I really had no idea what this job would entail, but I would get to help these scientists coming out of the university and all of their really unique innovations, and help them actually get their discoveries to the market, which is why I, wanted to be a scientist in the beginning. And so that's kind of how I transitioned into venture capital. And so venture capital, what is it? It's something that's kind of daunting to learn, but essentially we make investments into startup companies in exchange for equity. these companies have high growth potential, meaning that they have a very large market potential, thinking of it from like a disease perspective. So how many people in the world have osteoporosis? How many people have to take drugs for those? How much do those drugs cost? Like it's a huge market potential. Another really good analogy that everyone knows about now are the obesity drugs, the anti-obesity drugs. There's a huge market for that, and it's only going to keep growing. And so those are the kinds of companies we look for. And then there are 3 different investment structures. So the first one's called a safe note, which stands for a simple agreement for future equity. A convertible note, which is like a loan where we'll loan you money and then it will convert at a specific date, or a priced equity round where we're taking like straight equity into a company. And so at IU Ventures, I wanted to kind of go through our own process because they're most likely very similar to your organization's process. And then also something to note too, we are separate from the tech transfer office. So usually the first step is you're patenting something that you discovered. And then if you want to start a company, the tech transfer office usually is responsible for creating a business. And then you kind of come to us for potential investment. So IU Ventures, we invest in companies with strong IU DNA, meaning that the founder or someone within the C-suite, like a CEO, CTO, has IU DNA. And that means like they're an IU alumni, faculty, staff, student, or the licensee of an IU technology. And we do this with 2 different investment vehicles. So we have our philanthropic venture fund, and then we also have an IU angel network. And so our philanthropic venture fund, this is what I help manage on the team. It's an evergreen fund by nature. And so typically funds are structured with 10-year periods of, so like say you start a company, you have 10 years to show me that you're going to exit or create like a successful enterprise. However, evergreens, I don't have that 10-year cap. And so it's a little bit healthier of an environment and a little bit friendlier of an environment for venture capital as well. I'm sure some of the resources you've looked at about venture capitalists, they can be very greedy, they can be very predatory. However, like evergreen is a little bit more of a friendly structure. And then we also invest in early stage life science and software companies. Obviously, I focus on the life science companies, and we define early stage, which I have more slides on this as well, as about 6 months before an investigational new drug filing for like a therapeutic or some sort of regulatory equivalent for a medical device or even a digital health like software company. We currently have 30 portfolio companies, so we've made 30 investments into, again, different science companies. Our check sizes range anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million, depending on interest of the company, of course. And then some of our companies, just to be helpful, we actually have a company that focuses on hyperparathyroidism. So there's a little bit of similar like bone defects from that disease, but a heavy endocrinology company. We have an anti-obesity drug company. We have an Alzheimer's therapeutic company. We also have like a pancreatic diagnostic company. So like an earlier detection mechanism that uses like fewer liquid to detect, and so therefore earlier treatment. But those are the kinds of companies like we're investing in, and this is what I do like at my job. And then also we have an IU Angel
Emily,
network. Yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
ask a question? Because you said you were open to discussion as we
Yeah.
went through,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So just what do the companies do with the money? And then is there, how do they repay it, or what's the expectation for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So think of, you have grant funding where you apply for a specific grant. Say you get $3 million over 5 years to study your whatever you're working on. So with venture, again, we're taking more of an equity holding. So say I'll give you $1 million to study in your lab to kind of scale up like your production. So giving you funds of, you're working on drug discovery, you just filed like an FDA investigational new drug. Now you're kind of doing those translational studies where prepping for like a phase 1 clinical trial. That's like a good way of what those use of funds are for. So not only the science, but also if you need more team members, like you can kind of pay them because it is a company and you have to get paid. So, you know, you can require or recruit more team members with that money. And so those are kind of what like the use of funds are for, and then how you get paid back. And so it's very interesting in biotech venture because in other companies like software, they're making revenue constantly. And so you can bring in revenue and you know how well you're doing because, you know, 1 month you bring in this amount and then the next month you should, in a perfect world, make more money and keep going like that. And again, I'll get more into the weeds here in a few slides, but so say I invest $1 million into you with the goal of you getting acquired after like a phase 2 clinical trial. And what those acquisition targets look like or amounts is, you know, you could get acquired for $200 million. And so if you own still 40% of the company, maybe I own like 5%, then that's how I make my money plus a little extra on top. And in investing, it's like, I'll give you the $1 million first. I'm also going to charge like interest or like watch you grow over time because I made such a risky choice to invest in you at this early stage that has such a high risk of failure still. I believed in you. I betted on you. I'm going to get a little bit of extra kickback as well.
Gotcha.
And
So
you
the
also
time,
get kickback. You also get paid as well. So
so if the company doesn't get bought out, you might lose that investment,
yes.
or it might take a lot of time. Like if it takes 10 years, you're saying,
Yeah.
then the return may come much later than the initial
Yes.
investment.
Yeah. And I think so for example, software companies, they usually get returns in like 5 years, which is why people like on TV or like on Shark Tank love investing into those types. But life sciences are usually like an average of like 8 years. And so you have to be comfortable with playing the long game with these people. And I also will say, you know, again, we're friendly. And so sometimes we make no money. Sometimes the company has to shut down. And that's why choosing your investors is also very important because there's technically a clause that no matter what, if I put $1 million into your company, I'm going to get it back, even if it's your house, even if it's your car, and so that can be really scary. However, you know, we've worked with companies that have shut down and, you know, it's like, well, like you tried and like, I'm not going to make you go into debt because you tried. And so that's my mentality, but other venture groups are not like that. And so it's important to know who you're working with as well. It's a very like people relationship driven business. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
don't
is
want to
scary.
scare you immediately, but that can happen.
Were there any other questions before we go on? All right. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, of course. And then another type of funding mechanism we have is an angel network. And so angels are high net worth individuals, meaning that they make more than $150,000 a year and they can invest their own money. It's kind of funny because recently there have been a few changes that just because you have money doesn't mean you're educated enough to invest. And so they're starting to require more education. There's currently none though. You literally just have to have money to invest. But again, these are an angel network, angels with ties to IU, so they can, again, be alumni, faculty, staff, or somehow student if you're making a lot of money as a student. And then you can also be the parent of a current student at IU. And they invest in early stage companies as well, but they're industry agnostic, meaning they can invest in science, they can invest in software, they can invest in consumer product good, which is kind of fun. And they have 33 portfolio companies. And so, for example, like IU, we have plenty of schools, but we have like a vegan gelato company, we have an apparel company. So that's kind of fun for me to get to see those companies as well. And we have another analyst on the team that focuses on that, but it's fun that I get to see those deals too. And then just again, how to become like an IU entrepreneur or wherever school you're at. So usually, again, like you file with the tech transfer office, you patent the technology that you discovered there, create a company. And with us, we take every intro call. So I'll always take a call with anyone to explain how we invest and what we do. But usually like you share on their website or you email them directly. We'll interview you. I'll usually do like an intro call and then maybe like a secondary call to see if this is really an interesting opportunity. I'll connect you with anyone that I think is valuable within my IU network. So for example, if you are wanting to do a clinical trial on a company, I have like a chief innovation officer at IU Health or other hospital organizations that you should like chat with to do maybe a pilot or develop translational studies. Maybe you need samples from like a hospital, you know, if you're working with if you want human samples, things like that to kind of help set you up better for success. And then once kind of everything makes sense in our both of our worlds, I will invite you to pitch to our investment committee. I'll run a full due diligence on your company. So not only the research, but again, what's the potential market, market size, how much funding do you need to raise in order to get acquired over those 8 years that we talked about? Who are potential competitors? That's not as much of a concern in the life sciences because you are patenting things, so you're a little bit protected. But then on that note, how long, like when did you patent this? How long are you protected? And then potential exit partners or acquirers for you all. And then I'll make up that report and then I will like recommend, I think I usually just try to take 5% equity in the company at the time. So whatever that check size is, and you will come in and pitch to the committee. They'll vote yes or no if they want to invest or not. And then it's usually a yes, because I try to make, you've done all this work, once you get to that point, I want it to be like a pretty good yes. And then we'll wire the funds for you and you can continue about your scientific studies. And then more now generally focusing, so like venture capital in the life sciences, exactly what is it? So there are 3 main pillars. So biotech, creating new drugs, therapies, biologics. That's my background. So I love kind of focusing on that area. There's also digital health. We've been seeing a huge wave of digital health, like into hospital systems, how to manage patient records, how to improve health services, things like that. And then there's also medical devices and diagnostics. So diagnosing, monitoring, treating, and managing diseases. So those are the 3 big areas. And then just an example that I think is always helpful to walk through is like how, like you mentioned, Erica, like what are like the phases of studies and along with like venture capital, like financing opportunities. So usually pre-seed to Series A venture round is equivalent to a preclinical animal study that you're working on. And again, you're usually filing like an investigational new drug at this point, or filing like a 510(k) if you're working on a medical device. A Series A round, you're usually approaching like a phase 1 clinical trial, which I'm sure you guys know, but you're focusing on safety and pharmacology of the new drug. And then phase 2, you're doing safety and efficacy in intended patient population. This is equivalent to kind of like a Series B financing round. Phase 3, efficacy of new drug compared to current standards, which is like a Series C. And then phase 4, safety and efficacy in the defined patient group, which is like a Series D. And usually when you start to consider an exit, or you could go public as well, but usually people just want to get acquired. And then a little bit more on the stages of venture capital and like the funding sources. So I just went through like these stages, but pre-seed, like you're developing a concept, you're working on those animal studies, you're getting patents, you're creating your pitch deck. So kind of something like this, like you have to be able to pitch your company to investors in order for them to invest. And so the funding sources usually come from yourself, family, friends. This is the term of like bootstrapping, if you've heard that. Or micro VCs that usually have like $10 million area under management is what that stands for. And then progressing to the seed stage, you're getting a product or prototype. You've done those animal studies, you're maybe doing it in a bigger model. You need to fundraise now. So now you're focusing on early stage VCs like me or angel investors. And then as you progress again, so Series A, researching industry and markets, that market potential becomes a lot more important because you need a lot of market share, for example, like the obesity drugs, anti-obesity drugs, there's a ton of people trying to develop like the next best thing in that market. And so now I'm concerned more of like, okay, you have a really cool idea. Can you actually sell this, or can you actually maintain the majority of market share? Who are you talking to? Are you talking to people like Lilly that, you know, are doing the same thing and could be a potential acquirer? Are you generating revenue? Not for life sciences, that's not relevant. But then also planning to scale into new markets. And so when you guys study like your signaling pathways or whatever you're working on, there's usually like another indication or another disease type. And so with the drugs I worked on, you know, they also had a similar pathway in diabetes. And so it's like, okay, so I have a drug for osteoporosis. Can I also target diabetes in that space? And then also the mice that we were studying became like resistant to the flu. And so that was like a huge win because it was one drug that was that could impact 3 different diseases affecting the aging population. And so that was kind of huge. And so it's like, if you have multiple markets, then that's like a really beneficial venture opportunity. And then again, so this, like, who are you getting funding from? Super angel investors, so really rich people that have a lot of money, larger venture capitalists, accelerator programs, which kind of help scale your company, but they also take a decent chunk of equity at the time. And then again, moving on to just Series B, Series C, and beyond. So you're just keep growing, like you're gaining market share. You're working with late stage VCs. You're doing those clinical trials that we talked about, like a phase 2. You're getting good results. And then finally, for exit strategies, you're either going to go public or you're going to sell or get acquired by like another group. And then that's kind of
another quick question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So the phase 2 and 3 clinical trials, I mean, I've heard that they can cost tens of millions of dollars. Is that kind of the norm, or there's a lot of money going in and not much coming out at that time, which is
exactly
really scary, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's also really cool and like powerful because, and again, it's funny for the life sciences compared to like a software investment, because software, so think of like Microsoft, like you're generating revenue constantly and you're gaining more customers. But for life sciences, you're just raising more money. Like you're not bringing anything indoor, like anything, any revenue in. And so I really have to think about how much money do you need to raise in order to get your studies done and then in to have good enough data to get acquired. And so like a Series B, those rounds are typically like $115 million, like you're raising. And so, and thinking of like, we're based in the Midwest, like if in the United States, but you know, you think of Silicon Valley or like Boston, like these hubs, like in the United States. Ireland has like a big hub there as well, like a life science hub. You know, those venture funds are writing larger check sizes. They're writing $50 million checks. And so when you think of this due diligence process, like we're really having like a good relationship with you. Like I'm reading your papers, you're sharing the science with me, but also I'm helping you find business development people that know how to sell into like a Lilly, or like make your company on their radar at least. And so yeah, it's a lot of money to raise. And then a Series D that I just read about, like a healthcare investment, they just raised 120 million. And so typically when you're thinking of exit as well, like you want like a 3x multiple. So if you're raising like 100, I need you to be acquired for at least like 400 million in order to get like our money back, because it is so expensive. And then something else I always think about too is, as you go through all of these stages of your company, you're getting valued at like a higher price. So say like your pre-seed company, you have animal data, say you're worth like $5 million and you currently own 100% of the business because you discovered it in your lab. So you own like $5 million right now. But usually like a typical equity investment, you're giving away like 20% each round. And so sometimes that's scary because you'll go down to 80% and then 60% and then 40%. But, you know, 40% of 100 million or 200 million is a lot larger than 100% of 5 million. So that's something to think about as well. Like you keep valuing up too, because you're getting this data, you have positive clinical trial data. So you're kind of acquiring assets or like intellectual property too, to really value like your company.
Thank you for going into that. I think it's just so crazy to think about. We had one investigator that went through this full stage, and it's a great success story at Wash U. And I know him, and so talking to him personally, the final phase was he received his termination letter from Eli Lilly, firing him from his own company because they didn't need him anymore. But he'd been bought out for $110 million, right? And so everything was fine. That's exactly what should happen. But it's an interesting cycle because he developed this, and then now Lilly has it, and they're running with it. So yeah, but that's the goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all about again, like developing treatments or devices to help people. And so I find, I mean, obviously I work in the field and so I enjoy it, but it is like a fun opportunity to see your discoveries actually like make it to market. And that's like really all of my slides on venture. Something I always bring up whenever I'm speaking to scientists. There is a venture group called RA Capital, and they're based in the United States and I think Asia as well. But they have a lot of free resources on other career paths or like different business development opportunities, finance opportunities. And they also have a career map. And so like if you are interested in potentially leaving academia, or like maybe you do want to start a company, but you still want to be the scientist, but you want to know more information about venture capital or like business development, they have a lot of great resources. And so this is just a map of like, oh, like what do I want to do with my life? If you enjoy doing the science, you enjoy doing basic research, obviously this font gets smaller. So I apologize if you can't read it. But I can I'm happy to send it out too. Do you want to do like work in academia or industry? If you want to illustrate scientific concepts, if you want to be part of the healthcare and regulatory process, they'll give you like, oh, you can work for the FDA or you can work for Medicare or Medicaid. And then for me, so it's like, oh, I want to survey the landscape about technologies, business, and finance. Do I want to do business development, consulting, investing? And so it just gives you like a yes or no question, and then potential companies. So I always just like to, I guess, promote their website. And then RA Capital is good too with, there's a lot of talk about, of course, big pharma and like if they're evil or good because you're discovering things, but it's also like you're charging a bunch of money for them and things like that. But he is a good thought leader, the guy who runs this, Peter Kolchinsky, a great thought leader on behind like the great American drug deal is what he calls it. And so I advocate like reading all of his stuff because it's really good to think about as you're a scientist, but like what are these regulatory concerns like about the stuff you're discovering as well. So yeah, and that's pretty much my presentation. I'm happy to take any like questions, and I can